Good morning. Welcome to our Good Friday online sermon. And it feels strange, doesn't it, to not be meeting together on this day as we remember Jesus' ultimate act of love, his ultimate demonstration of God's amazing love for us. Now, normally at this point I would tell you the Bible passage and ask you to look it up yourself. But today I'm going to begin by just reading some words from the book of Luke. Pilate then called together the chief priests, the leaders and the people, and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was perverting the people. And here I have examined him in your presence, and have not found this man guilty of any of your charges against him. Neither has Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing to deserve death. I will therefore have him flogged and release him." Then they all shouted out together, "Away with this fellow! Release Barabbas for us." This was a man who had been put in prison for an insurrection that had taken place in the city, and for murder. Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again. But they kept shouting, "Crucify! Crucify him!" A third time he said to them, "Why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no ground for the sentence of death. I will therefore have him flogged and then release him." But they kept urgently demanding with loud shouts that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate gave his verdict that their demand should be granted. He released the man they asked for, the one who had been put in prison for insurrection and murder, and he handed Jesus over as they wished. Now, if you want to carry on reading the story, you can find it in Luke chapter 3, and I've read verses 13 to 25. As Jesus hung on that cross to die, it appeared to all the world as though Jesus had failed. His disciples had fled. The crowd around him mocked and taunted him. And so this surely was the moment that the Jesus movement ended. You see, the people wanted, and in fact had been promised, a Messiah who would defeat their enemies and set them free. And their taunts of "save yourself as you saved others" reveals something of their disappointment that this would-be Messiah was not the one that they believed he was. After all, a dead Messiah was no Messiah at all. And it's a disappointment that I guess we can relate to as well, isn't it? I said last Sunday that we often want a God who is strong, one who is in control, one who will ride in like a knight on a steed to save the day when we face difficult circumstances. And so, as we seek to make sense of what has happened on that first Good Friday, it's often been taught that this is the moment that the wrath of God is poured out onto Jesus, who takes on himself the punishment that should have been meant for us, enabling us instead to stand blameless before God. And despite the fact that this has often been taught exclusively as the way to understand the cross, and I can understand the appeal of that because it allows us to square the horrors of the cross with our image of the all-powerful God, as whilst Jesus, the Son of God, might be the one dying on the cross, it is God who is the one who is dishing out the punishment. It's not the only way to understand the cross, and I'll be honest and say it's, for me, not the most helpful way of understanding the cross. You see, it conjures up for me images of a God who cannot forgive without the need for sacrifice. A God who resorts in anger to violence and horror. And that is not a God that I see reflected in the story of the Bible. It's not a God that I see reflected in the things that Jesus did or the things that Jesus taught about God. And so, if you've not already branded me a heretic and turned this off, I want to explain to you a way that I find more helpful of understanding and of making sense of what happened on the cross on that first Good Friday. You see, we're surrounded, aren't we, in our world by darkness. We see that evidenced in greed, in hatred, in violence, in deceit, in prejudice, and in so many other ways. And this darkness around us grows each day as we add to them with our own individual indiscretions. And this darkness threatens to consume us, to tear our world apart. And ultimately, it is a battle that we cannot win. It is a struggle that will destroy us completely. But it is into that struggle, it is into that darkness that God, in the form of Jesus, steps. Not as a mighty warrior, but instead as one who is like us, one who is vulnerable, one who is fragile. And in this moment, he allows it to consume him. Now, of course, the danger of a Good Friday sermon is that we know the end of the story, don't we? And so we risk jumping ahead here to Easter Sunday, as we know that the ultimate hope is found in that empty tomb. As Jesus rises from the dead, the light of the world that the darkness cannot overcome. And we see that because of him, it doesn't have to overcome us either. However, for now, let's just remain at the foot of the cross. Let's remain in the Good Friday story and see the comfort that is to be found there. Because, you know what, if in these dark days you feel vulnerable and you feel weak, then let me tell you that you have a God who also knows what it is to feel like that. If you feel isolated and alone, then know that you have a God who has experienced that as well. And if you feel afraid, if you feel frustrated, if you feel upset, if you feel like everything is just too much and it's going to consume you, then know too that you have a God who knows what it is to have experienced all of those feelings too. And finally, know that while it might be dark now, it's only Friday and Sunday is on its way.